giving the title of the topic. And yep, I'm a content designer at DIA. And my topic basically is a project to help practitioners and organizations in New Zealand understand and deliver on accessibility. And there's certainly some similar thinking to some of the work that Gareth was describing. The aim is to make it easier to understand the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.1, by organizing them around practitioner roles and the work that they specifically do. And the goal is, for the most part, to direct people to existing quality guidance that's already out there. Because there's already so much guidance. You know, as Gareth was pointing out, you know, with WCAG, it's a technical document. It's brilliant as a reference document, but it's not easy reading material. Recently, we surveyed some practitioners to ask them to describe their experience of using WCAG guidelines, and these are some of the things they said. Confusing and overwhelming, complex and hard to find, weird language, hard to digest, and it's a search by numbers. You know, it's a lot, right? And most of the guidance that we have access to here in New Zealand has been developed overseas. So it's hard to know what's good and what isn't. And does it actually cover what we need in New Zealand? Because New Zealand requirements can differ from other countries. And here, if we are to meet the New Zealand Government Web Accessibility Standard, we need to meet WCAG 2.1. And so the problem that we face in New Zealand is that it's been 17 years since we've been mandated to make our websites accessible. But as Kylie was saying, you know, there's not much progress. Our websites, and that includes government and public sector websites, continue to have basic and critical accessibility issues and exclude people with disabilities from being able to access online information and services. Accessibility just isn't baked into the development cycle from the beginning, and it's still considered a special skill that only some digital practitioners have, when really it's the responsibility of the whole team. So to address the issues that practitioners are experiencing, we need guidance that acts as a central resource coming from government, because it's mandated by government. So the plan for this project is to put together a suite of guidelines that are organized around roles and the work that they do. And I'm not sure, you know, when you say document driven, I'm not sure, it sounds like it's the same thing, but I've got another label for it. We've been working hard on that label, so it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say, Gareth. But it's you know, guidelines that are organized around roles, the work that they do, which will point to discrete WCAG techniques. So I'm working closely with Jason Kiss, DIA's Principal Advisor on Accessibility, and he's keeping me real. We're using a design process, and these 3 questions are helping us to explore the problem and to inform the direction of the guidance. So how might we help practitioners to quickly understand what's required to make work, their web work, conform to the New Zealand Government Web Accessibility Standard? How might we help them easily incorporate critical accessibility techniques into their everyday tasks? And how might we help them clearly identify the best practice guidance that's already out there? We're still in the discovery phase, and currently reaching out to the community of practitioners to test our findings from the research. And I can give you an email address if you're interested to participate. Where the roles are concerned, there are a lot of different job titles out there, but we've refined them down to the following 8 core practitioner roles so far. So these 5 roles have a huge influence on whether the accessibility work gets done. The business stakeholder senior manager, the product owner project manager, user researcher, information architect, and the QA tester or analyst. And these 3 roles are the ones that actually apply the necessary techniques to make the web content they design or build accessible. The user interface visual designer, the developer, and the content designer. So everyone plays a part. Looking at the guidance through the lens of roles isn't an entirely new approach around the world. Others have taken it, but in New Zealand, it doesn't exist. And as I've said before, it's not about reinventing the wheel and adding more guidelines to the pool unless we identify a gap. It's rather, it will be linking to the best practice guidance out there that meets New Zealand requirements. So far, we've identified about 40 of the most common, what we're calling web content types. That's sort of the document driven, I'm not sure, but web content types is what we're calling them. For example, an accordion or button or you know, videos perhaps for a content designer. These common web content types that roles will be able to filter by according to their responsibilities, and all of them linked to WCAG success criteria. These will also be provided as an A to Z list, which we're aiming to make quite comprehensive, and so hopefully it's useful. And the plan is to wrap all the guidance you need around each of these web content types. So let's say a content designer is creating a glossary on a web page, or a developer is creating a side navigation menu. So we want to make sure that, you know, the best practice guidance on how to make it accessible, it's linked to right here. There are some examples of what good looks like. Who would benefit from this, you know, what types of disabilities would not be able to access it if you didn't do this work, how to test that you've done it right, and what WCAG success criteria, of course, this work meets. That's kind of important to know. So, just getting there. In summary, the new guidance will be able to be filtered through 3 different lenses: by role, through the lens of the individual practitioners; by topics, through the lens of general knowledge areas about accessibility that are relevant to different roles; and through the lens of web content types, the A to Z list. So now I'm a visual designer, so I've developed a tool using Kumu to map the relationships between all the data so we can see the patterns and connections between elements. People learn in different ways, and I'm hoping it will be a helpful tool in testing the robustness of the guidance, as well as ultimately making it available so people can have a play and filter according to their different perspectives. It can also be downloaded as a spreadsheet and provided in an accessible tabular format, which makes it accessible to everyone. So you can see the roles in the center of the map. I'm sorry, you know, it's all small, so I'm just going to describe like the concepts really of the map, and then in a moment I'll give you a little demo. The roles are in the center of the map in yellow, and then there's a circle around them of the topics or the knowledge areas in green. And then in blue are the 40 web content types, so 40 plus. You know, we're still establishing, you know, what everybody needs. And finally, in red are the 50 WCAG 2.1 success criteria that apply to the web content types. The ones in the big circle are the AA criteria that must be met if a website is to conform to New Zealand's government web accessibility standard. But off to the right are the additional 28 AAA success criteria if people want to go for this level. It's the highest level, but not necessarily the hardest to implement. It's just sometimes the hardest to test for. So the map is still in development, and a lot of relationships haven't been mapped out, but I'll just show you how it would work if you're interested. Okay, so it's a relationship map showing how roles are connected to the work that they do. And you can see them how, when it zooms back out again, how it relates to the 40 plus web content types. And then you can hover over one of the roles. For example, this is the content designer, and you can see some of the web content types a content designer works with. And then you can see which AA success criteria apply to a web content type. So here we're highlighting a video, and you can see the AA success criteria. But if you wanted to see the AAA, then you can see that as well for the video. You can see all these additional things that you could do if you wanted to go the extra mile. And then there are the topics. So these are the knowledge areas that apply to different roles. For example, a manager might need to know about what is web accessibility, why accessibility matters, or embedding accessibility in your organization. While a developer needs to know pretty much everything and has additional topics like best practices for accessible content and beyond WCAG. The tool also allows you to filter by one or more elements in each category. So I'll just show you here are a list of the topics that we've got at the moment. These are the broad headings underneath our all different, you know, child pages, if you like, of these topics. And you can also choose a particular success criterion, for example, 142, audio control, and see which web content type it applies to. And in the side panel, you can see some information with a link to the WCAG requirements, or you can click on the web content type and find out what are the accessibility techniques I really need to know about. So it's just a sort of a way of mapping the guidance so that we can eventually turn it all into web pages. So that is the project. The guidance is likely to start being published on digital.gov.nz in September, and we're trying to make sure that that site actually meets the standard by then, because we still have some work to do. So we hope this new guidance will make it easier for practitioners to incorporate accessibility work into their everyday tasks, that expertise will grow in New Zealand, and that we see a growth in the number of websites that meet the New Zealand government web accessibility standards, so that no one is excluded from accessing online information and services. And as a parting comment, based on my experience, if you want to understand WCAG 2.1, map out all the guidance. It's a slog, but you learn so much. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to be involved or ever have any questions, please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. Great presentation, addressing, well, what you're doing, the work that you're trying to do to address those needs within government and public sector sites to adhere to WCAG. Thank you so much. So I've noticed there's a few questions already, Lauren.
Yes, there is a few questions. Just want to start with saying just how impressed I am with the mapping you've done, and it's absolutely amazing. I was wondering, how long have you been working on that?
Well, the map has been, I built it right at the start of the project. So I started doing the research a few months ago. That's just like basically an environmental scan of what guidance exists in the world. What are people looking for, or what seemed to be the most useful? I'm looking at it very, very much from a practitioner perspective, because you know, I've been very passionate about accessibility for, you know, a good 10 years, but have had tremendous frustrations and, you know, suffering from lack of time basically to get my head into it. Every time, you know, I do something, I find myself dealing with numbers and, you know, which success criteria actually apply to the thing I'm doing right now. I just want an easy way in. So I started like that, and then have been talking a lot with other practitioners. So it's just this need for something a bit more comprehensive than already exists perhaps out there. Certainly doesn't exist in New Zealand, and people are stumbling around in the dark, not really sure what to trust.
Thank you, that's great. And we have a question from Steve, who's asking about the web accessibility clinics. Are they likely to restart soon? And do you know of any other things that are like this in the works? Because they are great and very useful.
So yes, actually, that's very timely. I had a meeting last Friday with Jason, and we would like to start the clinics in August. So I think it's the last Thursday of August would be when we are going to restart them, and there should be some information coming out 2 weeks before that, so very soon. Sorry, was there another question? The web clinics, and what was the other question?
If there was anything else in the works coming up that is similar to that.
Well, to the tool itself, no, but there are other initiatives in government that are happening right now. So there is the New Zealand Design System, which is still in alpha, and that is going to make it easy to stand up an accessible website. There's also new legislation being led by the Ministry of Social Development on behalf of the Minister for Disabilities. So that's going to make it, I don't know, tougher if people don't meet. I'm not quite sure, don't have any information, but I just know this new legislation, they're trying to bring a bit more stick and less carrot or something into making this happen. And the other initiative is that there's some discovery work being done, again led by DIA, to interview practitioners in New Zealand, and also mid and high-level executive management about this, the systemic barriers that people are encountering. I think they're also going to talk to vendors and other companies, just basically what are the barriers, and so that we don't just keep making the same mistakes. Yeah, it's just not working, whatever we're doing right now. So we want to make it easier for people to, just learn it, incorporate it as part of their, a bit like the work that Gareth was talking about. You can have people who are passionate and they will be the experts, but as soon as they leave, the organization, is in the dark again. So you just want it to be incorporated. Like architects, they're used to design buildings and then run off and talk to an accessibility specialist about widening the doors and putting ramps in. But nowadays it's part of the skill of being an architect. You do actually, you just know you've got to do the accessible side of it as well. So digital accessibility probably it might be more complex, I don't know, because it's a fast moving industry, but certainly it's something that all of us can we're responsible for, and we can improve, each one of us. It's just making it easy to understand how.
Thank you, that's great. We have one last question, which is, what moves is DIA or other agencies making to recruit people with lived experience of accessibility or disability to roles in development and service design teams?
Well, that is such an excellent question, because I ask the same question myself all the time. It's very important. And I think, again, going back to what Gareth was saying, it's like there's something about none of this works unless it's in the culture, unless management are supporting the initiatives, unless we, HR understands, like our hiring and our inductions and even our training modules, our intranets, all of these things. If we were hiring people with lived experience, then and testing, even if it's just doing user research, then people would just become much more aware and make sure that the equipment around us works for everyone and not just for able-bodied people, or, and also, it's sometimes a situational, temporary thing, so it can happen to anybody at any time.
Thank you very much.
So sorry, I don't have an answer to that. I'm asking that question myself, pushing for it, if you like.
Okay, so is that the last of the questions, or is there one more in there, Lauren?
That was the last one there, yep.
Okay.
I didn't really answer the question about the Kumu tool properly, I just realized. And what I'm trying to say is that it's been part of the project all along. And so the more information I have about how, things are connected to each other, the more the map will become robust. And I'm hoping to be able to share that, with people. So it's progressing with the project. It's not finished until the project's done, probably.
Thank you so much, Tamsin, for the time and effort you put into your presentation and sharing with us what's happening in local government. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our speakers. Unfortunately, one of our speakers couldn't make it, so we do have a few extra minutes. What I would like to suggest, if the panelists are open, is for the Q&A to go open to the whole panel. So are you all keen? Thumbs up if you're keen.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we'll open the Q&A for everybody.
May I just probably say first, Tamsin, congratulations and thank you for making an accessible version of your guide, because so often it is assumed that disabled people are only the beneficiaries of this and not contributors to it.
Well, thank you. Absolutely. Yes. Very important.
Doesn't look like any questions are coming in.
Wall of silence.
Bamboozled them all.
Just wanted to note that there were some questions that weren't answered, we weren't able to answer at the time, but the speakers have actually gone and written some text-based answers to those questions in the chat, which we can share later as well. I think that can be an excerpt if we need to.
Okay.
I've got a general comment I can add if it's useful.
Yes.
Cool. Just one reflection on working inside an organization where you've got a bunch of people sort of striving for change and like trying to make things better. One thing that would help people like me in that situation out a lot is we actually monitor, like we have feedback channel open for the new responsive trade me that we're building, and it probably still is open. And we're monitoring that feedback all the time, and things that come in, if people actually are complaining about things, even though it's not everyone's job to complain about things for them to be better, we should be doing better anyway. But it gives you power within a team to say, hey, people are talking about this being a problem for them. They're real. It makes you a real person when if you're complaining. It's actually like, I know people have fatigue about complaining. I'm not saying that it's everyone's responsibility to complain. But if you do that, and if people could channel their like focus, like if you've got a group of people that are all know something could be better, if you all complain at the same site at the same time for a little while, it's actually super, like you're actually hooking someone up that's working in there trying to make change. You're actually giving them like a ticket to be able to prioritize that work. Even if they know about it, they might be in there saying, hey, we need to do this. And someone else might be saying, yeah, but how many people is that really going to affect? No one's even talking about it in the feedback. So just a shout out to like, your voices are heard inside companies, even in the private sector. And like, yeah, not to forget that.
Big organisation. The BBC isn't huge. I mean, we've got about 18,000 members of staff. I mean, in some ways that's large, but when we look at other broadcasters, we're quite small. And organisations who do VOD, etc. But we encourage everyone give us feedback and give us as much information as you can. We read everything. I mean, we get 5,000 to 10,000 correspondence a day from our audience, but that information is so useful. And contextualize it. Tell us about the equipment you're using. Tell us when it happened. Tell us what you experienced. And it's really, really useful, because then we can try and recreate the problem. And then we can then start investigating and then getting stuck into stuff. But exactly what Maz said, it's not really complaints, it's user feedback, it's dialogue. And without that dialogue, we're constantly seeking that dialogue, but come to us and it all does come through. You'll get a standard response, and then it ends up with the product team. And then we have a discussion, and then we try and investigate it a little bit further and go, is there something we're missing here? Is there an opportunity here? How big is this? And then we'll go off and talk to a representative organization and say, have you ever heard about this before? And it expands. And sometimes we've ended up going to talk to Apple or Microsoft or Google, because it's actually a shared problem between us and them. And then it creates a bigger thing. You've no idea how useful feedback is. It's brilliant.
Thank you. That's really powerful.
I think speaking for the community, though, we do get complaint and fatigue, because often we don't actually get a response at all when we complain. We either get ignored, or we get the standard thing saying, oh, we'll pass it on, and we never hear anything. So we get kind of tired of complaining after a while, because it doesn't seem to make any change.
I can understand that must be quite frustrating. But I think, the point is just to do it anyway and hope that someone
it's and sometimes we discover things that honestly we would have never have imagined, because we don't. One of the things is you can never quite always imagine the way that people are going to use the equipment that they've got. It's not the equipment itself, it's not even understanding the equipment, but human beings are really creative in the way that they cobble together different systems and processes, and they almost create their own user experience of your content, and it gives us, it's really, really good. And sometimes change doesn't happen overnight, but it's all good data, and deliver it as, by the way, this is my experience, and I think you need to know that. It's try not to think about it as complaining, and try and create a dialogue.
Great. We have two questions that have come through, or three questions that have come through on the chat. So the first one is, with an organization with a wider footprint of products, can the accessibility guidelines be generic, or is it idle to review the accessibility requirements for each product separately?
Who wants to be brave and take that one?
Can you re-say it again? Somewhere in the middle of it, my head melted.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
So to paraphrase it shorter, it would be saying if you've got a lot of products, rather than kind of reviewing the guidelines generically across your wide footprint of products, or do you look at them each one separately and review it?
I think it can.
Yeah. Go on, Tamsin.
Well, I think it can only be done separately, but then apply consistently across your products. And you can't, I mean, when you are auditing websites, you don't look at every single page anyway, let alone every single product. You're looking at a selection of pages, you know, auditing and making sure that they're right. And so, you know, the work then applying that same pattern across the website gradually. But it would be impossible to do everything all at once. It's just that what you're doing needs to be consistently done across all the products.
Yeah, totally agree with that. But then again, there is stuff that is specific to specific audiences. So if we're designing something for, say, for instance, for World Service, which is going out in the South Sudan, it's going to be a very, very different audience to the under sixes in the UK. You know, we have to approach accessibility there's so many different lenses to it, which is specific to different product types, to their audiences and the context that their audiences are accessing that on. So we have, for World Service, we have a very different view of accessibility because we're looking at developing nation technologies to something would be bbc.com, which will go in Europe and North America predominantly, which has a very Western view of perspective of technology and an opportunity for the audiences. So you have to think about things in a slightly different way in the context of the users and the equipment that they have access to. But again, the under sixes, none of them using assistive technology pretty much, and they're also, you've got to think about the under six audiences are also, a lot of them, the carers come from their grandparents. So you've got to make it age-related accessible and accessible to the under sixes, and think about the consistency all at the same time. But it's doable. It is doable. It just takes a bit of thought.
Can you give an example of, accessibility for a 6-year-old and accessibility in, Sudan?
So in the world, so some of the more difficult regions that we broadcast in, you are looking at basically you're looking at things that are freeware. You're looking at stuff that is a lot of legacy platforms, feature phones rather than sort of iPhones and stuff like that. You're really looking at a progressive enhancement in its purest form. And you're also you have to think about socio-economic accessibility as well, because then you have to make everything really light, served as locally as possible, as data efficient as possible. And you've got to then still fit in all of the multimodality. And so there's some places where the news app, the data is so expensive, the application actually makes a phone call and the audio is delivered down the phone line via the application because it's cheaper than mobile data. And so you've got to think, because this could be 10 times the cost that we're paying for data for people who earn, 50 times less than we do. And so you've got to think about all those kind of rights around accessibility. And with kids, that's a totally different thing. So all kids have accessibility needs because they're all at different stages of development and they're all developing in slightly different ways. And so, everything is read along, everything works in a way that everything that's displayed visually also has to have an audio equivalent. So everything you click on, every kind of bit of discovery, it gives something unique that also gives you that information. You think about touch screens because you make everything around the edge of the touch screen not interactable because kids have a tendency of grabbing the screens. You look at their physical way. And you watch the way that they play. You go to different types of schools and watch the way children interact. I mean, something I was kind of lucky because I kind of grew up My father actually ran a school which was a residential school for kids with really complex needs, and they all lived there, and they were my friends from the age of 2. But we also had great connections with the blind school. But you watch blind kids playing, they don't run around. They don't. Free explore is a difficult thing. And so you build in that opportunity of free explore, and you give encouragement around it. And games for children have a no fail mode. So no matter what you do, something fun happens and there's an interaction and you help them build skills. There's so many different things, but you think about children when you're building children's stuff. You don't think about guidelines. Start with the kids and start with the people in the difficult regions, and then work towards it and find what the guidelines can enable you to do. It's not a box ticking exercise.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome. So we have a question from Steve, and this is directed for everyone. And the question is, what's the most important thing that we can do to help our organizations move from a compliance, we have to do this mindset, to a, hey, this is good design and important kind of mindset?
I think Gareth just answered it, actually. Think about your audience. Know your audience.
I would suggest the best way is to get management to watch people trying to use your content, access it. When they see that, something happened. That's the aha moment. When they see it's how broken it is.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
sorry, Carl, go on.
I was going to say one thing that's always good to put into context is that if we stop thinking about it as a compliance thing and as we're trying to help our customers thing, like think of them as people, not just a box that we need to check off, but really these are people that are interacting with the systems that we designed, that are really doing the things that they want to be able to. So for example, as I mentioned before, I work at a bank, so these are people who want to be able to do their banking, and it's not a like I said, it's not a checkbox. These are real people, and sometimes putting a face to and kind of just going off what you were saying, Tamsin, putting a face to the story to say, hey, Joe here is can't log in because the login page doesn't interact with the screen reader very well. That's alarm bells, right? Because all of a sudden that's somebody who can't use your system.
Yep.
Yeah, totally agree with that. It's moving their mindset from worthy to worthwhile. It's constantly the problem with accessibility is the word, because it's such a loaded word. You kind of take the baggage with it, and you kind of have to, unfortunately people see it and go, it's a nice thing to do. It's not a nice thing to do. Just we just want everyone to access it, but there actually is so much opportunity in there. And contextualize it to them. Just say, look, if you do that, you get a free SEO improvement. It improves all our access through social media. It improves our user engagement. It actually makes things more robust. So if stuff fails, we don't end up serving up blank pages. And put all of the other stuff that comes in and just go, you want all of that. So if we do accessibility, you get all that for free. And so they start turning around and going, hang on a minute, this is self-financing because of all of this great additional stuff that comes in. And at the same time, that enables us to be more inclusive and reach more of an audience and put that face to it. I think the first thing, I used to make TV trails for the BBC. That's where I joined it. I used to, I came from a creative background, and the first thing I made was a film of users who were all pro BBC, who were all struggling with it, just going, I just want to find the arches. What's going on? There's a list of 300 things here. I know it's accessible to me, but I've got to listen to all of them. Sit here and listen with me as I go through them all, because of the way you've marked it up. And it is useful. Tell the story.
I hate to interrupt because we could probably go on all evening, but I think that's going to be a wrap for this evening. So I'd like to just send a huge thank you to our panelists for the time and effort that you've put into presenting some really, really interesting and inspirational thoughts and ideas. So there was a lot of information posted in the chat channels, which we will make available, a lot of resources. We will post that onto our meetup page. And that's it. That's a wrap. So I'd like to thank Sarah, who made this possible, doing the technical host. I'd like to thank Lauren for facilitating the Q&A and being a fantastic support in the meetup. And that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
So
you,
just
everyone,
want
for
to
inviting me.
thank the live
Thanks, everyone.
captioners as well.
Sorry, yeah, last but not least.
And Zoe, who has pretty much done the
Yes.
hard work
Yes.
for this whole thing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks, Zoe.
Thank you so
Cool.
much.
Thanks a lot.
I
Thanks,
will
everyone.
be in touch